A black woman walks into the police department. No badge, no uniform. No one knows she's the city's new police chief. She stands there, calm, silent, in a room filled with sneers and mocking laughter. No one realizes that the woman they're belittling is the highest-ranking authority in the building. And just minutes later, a cocky white officer throws a punch and unknowingly knocks out his own career, because real power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who knows how to wait for the right moment to speak the truth. And today, the entire department is about to listen. The city of Arlington, a mid-sized southern town, might look peaceful on the surface, but beneath that polished facade lies a fractured law enforcement system, a place where offhand jokes about race still echo in break rooms, where white officers rise quickly and officers of color, no matter how skilled, have to work twice as hard just to be acknowledged. Before Vanessa Thompson's appointment as chief of police, the Arlington Police Department was a conservative machine, powered by longtime veterans who clung tightly to their authority. They didn't need to voice their resistance to change. They simply ignored it, slowed it down, and hoped it would disappear. To them, a black woman in charge wasn't just unlikely. It was unacceptable, but the order had already come down. City Hall had made its decision. The council had approved the motion, and no amount of silent disapproval could change the fact. Vanessa Thompson was now in command. She was 45 years old, with 2 decades in the force. She'd worked high-crime districts, negotiated hostage situations, and led major tactical operations. No one could deny her credentials, but in a place like Arlington, credentials were never enough. Medium build, deep brown skin, short, tightly coiled hair, eyes sharp, voice low, even, always in control. Vanessa didn't raise her voice to be heard. She simply looked. And the room adjusted accordingly, but she knew better than to believe skill alone could change a system like this. To dismantle a structure built on decades of power and preference, you need more than experience. You need a plan, and the resolve to stand alone when necessary. Over the years, she had witnessed not only how black citizens were mistreated, but how minority officers were isolated, overlooked, and quietly pushed out simply for speaking up. That's why she didn't step into this role hoping that doing the job well would be enough. She came to reset the foundation, to build a version of justice that didn't check skin tone first. And she knew her first day wouldn't come with flowers or applause. It would come with suspicion and a trial by fire no one would name aloud. So Vanessa chose to walk into the police department as a stranger. No badge, no uniform, no nameplate, just a black woman walking through the front door to see how they'd treat someone they thought didn't matter. What they didn't know was that the moment she pushed open that glass door, the entire system was about to meet its own reflection. The main lobby of the Arlington Police Department smelled faintly of stale coffee and buzzed with the chaotic hum of fax machines. It looked busy, but beneath the surface, power moved quietly, masked by paperwork and routine. Vanessa stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the room. No one noticed. No one knew who she was, just the way she wanted it. A young officer sat behind the reception desk, eyes glued to his phone. A black man waited anxiously in the corner, seated on a cracked vinyl chair. No one spoke to him. No one cared. Vanessa walked up, her voice calm but firm. "I need to see HR." The young officer didn't bother looking up. He tossed her a glance, dismissive. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes. I'm here to complete my onboarding." This time, he looked at her. A full scan from head to toe. Black, jeans, simple blazer, no name tag, no badge. He shrugged and returned to his screen. "Take a seat." Vanessa said nothing, but she memorized his face. Then the hallway door swung open. Heavy boots echoed across the tile. A tall, broad-shouldered man entered in full uniform, short-cropped hair, square jaw, and eyes that pierced more than they saw. Lieutenant Richard Miller. He didn't need to introduce himself. The way he stood, breathed, spoke. Olive. It reeked of old-school dominance, of power sharpened in silence and fed by bias. He glanced at Vanessa like she was an uninvited disruption. "What are you doing here?" His voice was dry, flat, an order disguised as a question. "I'm here to see HR," Vanessa replied, calm and unshaken. Miller folded his arms, raising an eyebrow with smug amusement. "We don't offer welfare services here. If you're looking for housing assistance, you're in the wrong place." A few snickers broke out from the corner. A group of young officers pretended not to stare, but their eyes remained locked on the scene unfolding. Vanessa didn't react. She didn't need to. "I'm here for onboarding," she repeated evenly. "What kind of onboarding? Janitorial? Community outreach?" She met his eyes. 1 second. 2. No blink. "I've stated my reason. Could you call someone from HR?" Miller tilted his head. The contempt shifted into challenge. He stepped closer, now only a few feet away. "No one here is available to help people like you. You think a blazer gives you authority in this building?" The room went still. Even the admin in the back paused mid-copy. Vanessa didn't flinch, didn't bow. "If you can't assist me, I'll find someone who can." It struck a nerve. Miller scoffed, amused but uneasy. "People like you always think it's about race, always think you're owed something." He picked up the radio, but didn't call anyone. Instead, he turned to the young officer behind the desk. "Hey, you see anyone here needing help?" "She wants to see HR," the young man muttered, suddenly unsure. Miller waved him off. "Nonsense. This is a police department, not a welfare office." Now Vanessa understood. This wasn't just about disrespect. This was a test, a way to make sure she understood she didn't belong, if she stayed silent. But she didn't stay silent. "I'll wait right here until I speak with the right person. If that threatens you, call your superior." Miller smirked, but the edge was gone. She hadn't yelled, hadn't walked out, and more importantly, hadn't backed down. That unnerved him. "You're making this harder on yourself," he warned. Vanessa said nothing, but her stare, steady, unwavering, said everything. It didn't shout. It didn't plead. It simply stood there. And in that moment, the system Richard Miller thought he controlled trembled. The air in the Arlington Police Department's lobby was suffocating. No alarms blared, no commands were shouted, but tension pulsed just beneath the skin of every officer in the room. Vanessa still stood, calm as stone in a rushing current. Lieutenant Richard Miller, a man long used to unchecked authority, was running out of patience. "I'm warning you one last time," he growled. "Leave now, or I'll have you escorted out." Vanessa tilted her head, eyes steady, on his face. "Then go ahead. Let's see who gets escorted." A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the younger officers exchanged looks. This woman. She wasn't like the others Miller liked to intimidate. Miller stepped closer, barely half a step now. His breath was hot, bitter with frustration. "Fine," he snarled. "You want to speak to someone higher? I'll get you. Someone." He waved to a nearby officer, a younger man, hesitant. "Lieutenant, you sure?" the officer asked quietly. "Do it," Miller barked. The young officer approached Vanessa, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't show fear. "I'd advise you not to touch me," Vanessa said, her voice low but sharp as glass. Miller let out a contemptuous laugh. "That attitude's gonna get you nowhere." He reached out to grab her, but before his hand touched her, Vanessa turned, a subtle pivot, swift and clean. Not violent, but absolute. The shift in power stunned Miller just for a second, and in that second, rage took over. "You dare defy me?" Vanessa said nothing. She stood tall, unmoved. That stare, icy, composed, fearless, was the final drop that cracked the dam. In a flash, Miller's fist flew. Crack! The sound echoed through the lobby like thunder on a cloudless day. Vanessa staggered, catching herself on the edge of a desk. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. The room went dead silent. No one laughed. No one spoke. A few younger officers froze. A clerk covered her mouth, stifling a scream. Another reached for a phone, then stopped, unsure who to call. Vanessa didn't fall. She looked up, blood on her lip, eyes unchanged. Not angry, not afraid, not broken, just terrifyingly still. Miller stepped back, a half step, suddenly unsure, still trying to look tough. You have no idea who you're messing with." Just then, the HR office door burst open. Middle-aged man with silvering hair and a file folder in hand stepped out. He started to scold the commotion. Then he saw Vanessa. He froze, pale as chalk. "Dear God," he whispered. Then, almost shouting, "Are you all insane? That's the new chief of police, Chief Vanessa Thompson." The words hit the lobby like a bomb. Miller reeled, mouth ajar. Someone dropped a coffee cup. Another officer stammered, "No, no way." Vanessa said nothing. She simply reached into her blazer and pulled out a silver badge. Chief of Police. Vanessa Thompson, no. Further explanation needed. They all understood that punch wasn't just a blow to a woman, it was a blow to their careers, to their power structure, to a system that had been rotting from the inside for far too long. Vanessa glanced at Miller, once the proud head of patrol, now pale, stammering, trembling. But she didn't speak. She didn't need to, because sometimes silence is the sharpest punishment of all. There were no more jokes, no more defiant stares. After that punch and the HR director's thunderous declaration, the Arlington Police Department was swallowed in a terrifying silence. Vanessa Thompson, the woman they had mocked, dismissed, assaulted, now stood not just as a victim, but as the person with the highest authority in the room. And the most unsettling part? She wasn't even angry. Richard Miller stood frozen. His broad shoulders were rigid, but his authority had drained from his body, like blood from a wound. His face, usually carved from stone, was ghost pale. His mouth opened. No sound came. The clerk, who had earlier gasped in horror, was now standing tall. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked awake. In the corner, a young officer quietly locked his phone screen, ending the video. Too late. In the age of social media, a few seconds were enough to become a tsunami. Miller exhaled, desperate to claw back even a shred of the power he once wielded. I didn't know. If I'd known you were—" Vanessa cut him off. "You didn't know who I was. And that's exactly the problem." The words landed like a blade through glass. "When you thought I was just another woman, you felt entitled to mock me, to threaten me, to lay hands on me." She paused. Her eyes swept the room. "And what if I wasn't the chief of police? What if I was just a black woman walking in to report a crime? How would you have treated me then?" No one answered. They didn't need to, because Vanessa wasn't speaking to a man anymore. She was addressing a system. A middle-aged officer, who had laughed the loudest earlier, suddenly slumped into a chair, sweat beading on his forehead. He felt exposed, not by screaming but by a silence that commanded the entire room. "You may think you punched a woman," Vanessa said quietly, "but what you really struck was your career. And more than that, the last shred of public trust this city had in this department." Miller swallowed hard. He glanced around, looking for backup, for someone, anyone, to defend him. But the eyes that once admired him now avoided his gaze. The people who used to call him Old Iron were backing away. Inch by inch, the empire of Richard Miller had crumbled. Vanessa took out her phone, calmly tapped a few buttons, raised it to her ear. "This is Chief Vanessa Thompson. I need internal affairs at the precinct immediately. Reason: physical assault and serious misconduct by a senior. Lieutenant. Also requesting the temporary suspension of all involved officers pending investigation." Her voice was calm, unshaken, but each word crashed like a tidal wave into the chests of those who once thought power was eternal, and that skin color could define someone's worth. A young officer stepped forward, nervous, his voice low. "Ma'am, I didn't know. If I had, Vanessa gently shook her head. "If you only show respect to rank, you're in the wrong profession." The officer turned red and fell silent. In the corner, Miller still stood, a monument to a fading era. Sweat rolled down his neck, once proud, once feared, now exposed as a bully with no control, abandoned by the very system he once manipulated. Vanessa stepped forward. No one dared block her path. No one dared speak. She didn't need protection. She didn't need backup. Because from this moment forward, she was the one rewriting the rules. The next morning, the Arlington Police Department was no longer just an anonymous building in a quiet southern city. It was all over the national news. CBS, CNN, and even trending atop Twitter. Headline: Police officer punches black woman. Unaware she's the new chief of police. Accompanying it was a 38-second video, capturing the exact moment. Richard Miller threw a punch out of instinct, and the immediate unraveling that followed. No words were needed. Everyone understood. Each frame slashed through the carefully preserved mask of the local justice system. The smug laughter, the contemptuous glances, the punch packed with the arrogance of a crumbling empire. Vanessa Thompson didn't look like a victim. In the clip she stood, steady, composed, blood on her lip, but no fear in her eyes. It wasn't the violence that gripped people. It was how she stood, even after being struck, even after being humiliated, calm, grounded. And when she said, "Arrest Lieutenant Richard Miller," the internet erupted. Chief Thompson trended first on Twitter, then spread to Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. Comment sections lit up. That punch just ended his career. This isn't a movie. This is America. She didn't yell. She just stood there and silenced the entire system. I want my kid to see this, that justice doesn't have to scream. At City Hall, the mayor's media team scrambled. Someone tried to contain the narrative, but it was too late. Because once truth is recorded, no one gets to edit it. In time. In a small cafe near the precinct, a young journalist interviewed locals. A black woman wearing a t-shirt that read, "Dignity is not optional," spoke into the mic. "I grew up here. I know that building isn't safe for people who look like me, but today was the first time I saw a woman stand up without raising her voice. She just stood, and everything fell." Back at the station, cracks appeared in the wall of silence. Some young officers emailed the chief, requesting private meetings, to apologize. A few others filed for temporary leave, stating they didn't feel morally equipped to continue working until I understand how I became complicit in wrongdoing. Of course, not everyone changed. A few tried to excuse Miller's actions, calling it a misunderstanding, the pressure of the job. But the more they explained, the more isolated they became. Because this time, there were no rumors. There were images. There were witnesses. There was truth. And truth needs no defense. Vanessa sat in the conference room reading the official reports. No press interviews, no press conference, no personal statements. She issued only one instruction: deliver the full video to Internal Affairs and the Department of Justice. Because she knew her silence would travel farther than any podium speech ever could. She didn't have to speak. The world was speaking for her. A high school student clipped the video into a TikTok reel, layering Beyoncé's Freedom underneath. Within 12 hours, it had over 2 million views. A retired veteran, once Miller's close friend, published an open letter demanding his former comrade be stripped of all honors. "I once believed he was the embodiment of discipline. Now I see a man who couldn't control himself." As the entire city began confronting its own reflection, one thing became clear. Richard Miller's punch wasn't just an act of violence. It was the face of a system that fears difference, rejects reform, and believes past rank protects from present accountability. But that day, with the tap of a record button, truth stepped into the light. And this time, it's not going back into the dark. At Arlington Police Headquarters, that morning was unlike any other. Gone were the mocking laughs echoing down the hallway. Gone was the arrogant stomp of boots that had once welcomed Vanessa's arrival with disdain. Now every footstep felt heavy, because no one knew if their name would be called next. At exactly 8 a.m., Vanessa Thompson entered the high-level briefing room. She wore a crisp black uniform. 3 silver stars gleamed on her epaulettes. But it wasn't her rank that silenced the room. It was her gaze, calm, cold, unwavering. A look that said, "I've seen everything, and I don't need to explain myself." No one dared greet her. No one smiled. She gave a brief nod and took the seat at the head of the table. Before her sat more than 20 officers, team leaders, lieutenants, and some who had once laughed loudly when Richard Miller raised his fist. Now they looked down, hands clasped, eyes evasive. Vanessa opened a folder. She didn't begin with a speech, no personal anecdotes, no recap of what everyone already knew. She was silent, so silent that every throat cleared in the room sounded out of place. 30 seconds. 1 full minute. Tension thickened. Men began to shift in their seats. Vanessa kept flipping pages, witness statements, freeze-frame video stills, officer disciplinary records. Then she looked up. Her eyes swept across the room. "I don't need your explanations," she said, voice low and even, but each word hit like a judge's gavel. "I've seen enough. In person. And through the cameras you thought no one watched." Dead silence. "What shocked me wasn't the punch," she continued. "It was the silence. From all of you, you saw it. You stood by, and you chose to do nothing." A lieutenant swallowed hard. Another bit his lip. Vanessa didn't shout. She didn't insult. She let the silence do her work, and in that silence, sentences were being handed out. Later, a young female officer would recall, "The scariest moment wasn't when Chief Thompson ordered Miller's arrest. It was when I sat across from her, waiting for her to say my name. Not because I feared losing my job, but because I feared that gaze. The gaze of someone who had been humiliated, hit, disrespected, and still sat tall, said nothing, and held more power than any yell ever could. That was when I realized she didn't have to raise her voice to make me feel small. I felt small because of what I'd accepted in silence." That afternoon, Vanessa skipped the press conference. She handed it to the media team and returned to her office, where dozens of apology letters sat neatly on her desk. None of them began with excuses. Each one started with a single word. "Sorry." An older officer left a short handwritten note. "I didn't have the courage to stop the punch. But today, I will not stay silent again." Vanessa read each letter. She didn't reply. She didn't judge, but she took note. Who had written, who hadn't, and who still acted as if nothing had changed. That evening, as the city prepared for a peaceful march outside City Hall, an 11-year-old boy approached Vanessa. In his hand was a newspaper, a photo of her facing Miller, blood on her lip. He whispered, "I saw you didn't hit him back, but you still won. How come?" Vanessa smiled and knelt beside him. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "strength isn't in the punch you throw. It's in standing still long enough. For the world to see who's truly weak. The boy nodded, eyes wide with understanding. And for the first time in days, Vanessa exhaled. She knew. Her silence had spoken. And now, everyone was listening. 2 weeks after the incident, the Arlington Police Department had completely transformed. Not because of equality posters lining the hallways, not because of rousing speeches delivered to the media, but because of one simple thing. People. Vanessa Thompson started with the basics. She didn't reform policies, she reformed people. On the first morning of internal retraining, every officer, from sergeants to senior lieutenants, was summoned to the auditorium. There was no agenda, no opening remarks, only Vanessa walking to the stage with a list in hand. She opened with a single question that froze the entire room. How many of you have ever witnessed a fellow officer disrespect a person of color and chose to stay silent? No one raised their hand, but their faces said enough. Vanessa nodded. Then, today's training starts there, with the silence you've all convinced yourselves is neutrality. For the next 10 days, she suspended all free patrol shifts. Instead, every officer had to attend 3 mandatory training sessions. Implicit bias in law enforcement behavior, nonviolent conflict resolution skills, community communication across cultural lines. No internal instructors led the sessions. Vanessa invited people who had been on the receiving end, black citizens, immigrants, teenagers who had been profiled, to speak directly to the officers. They didn't yell, they didn't curse, they just told their stories. And their eyes alone were enough to make any officer with a conscience look away. Then came the bombshell. Vanessa ordered the temporary suspension of any officer with more than 2 recorded complaints of racial bias within the last 5 years. Even if no disciplinary action had ever been taken, one senior lieutenant protested, "You can't treat my entire team like suspects." Vanessa's reply, eyes unblinking, "I'm not accusing them. I'm asking them to pause and learn how to see the world through someone else's eyes." At the same time, she launched the Citizen Oversight Council, made up of past complainants, social advocates, and student reps, to assess feedback from the public. They couldn't fire officers, but they had one power: to compel any officer to sit down face to face and listen to those who had filed complaints against them. A month later, Arlington experienced something unprecedented. Police officers began issuing public apologies. Not because they were forced, but because, after those dialogues, some of the very people who once mocked Vanessa began to realize their arrogance was the root of the problem. A seasoned officer, Lieutenant Warren, opted for early retirement. After one such session, in a handwritten letter to Vanessa, he wrote, "I used to think I wasn't part of the problem, but I laughed when others were degraded, and I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Thank you for making me face the truth." And then, Vanessa began the hardest task of all: rebuilding trust. She personally visited neighborhoods, not to give speeches, but to listen. From black mothers fearful their sons might be pulled over unjustly, to veterans turned away for help. There were no cameras, no press releases, just Vanessa sitting quietly, asking, if you could change one thing about this department, what would it be? She collected over 700 handwritten responses. No one knew what she did with them. Until 3 weeks later, a sweeping personnel reshuffle took place, and those whose names were frequently cited were no longer assigned to those neighborhoods. A college student, the one who'd filmed the slap that began it all, later told reporters, she didn't seek revenge, she didn't humiliate anyone, but she made every single person face themselves. And that's the highest form of justice. Inside Richard Miller's old office, now spotless, Vanessa placed a wooden plaque, engraved with a single sentence: "You don't need to shout to earn respect. You just need to stand still, in the right place, and not back down." One afternoon in mid-March, Arlington's Central Square was packed. The air hung heavy, as if the whole city was holding its breath. On a makeshift stage, dozens of cameras from CNN, MSNBC, even the BBC, were trained on a single microphone. A black woman in a navy blue button-down, not a uniform, walked slowly toward it. Vanessa Thompson, newly appointed Chief of Police, Arlington. She didn't read from a script. She didn't glance at a teleprompter. She looked straight at the crowd and spoke in a calm, steady voice. I didn't come here to apologize for what others have done. A ripple of murmurs rose through the crowd, but she raised one hand gently, signaling silence. I came here to make sure it never happens again. The media had dubbed the incident a punch that cracked the system, but Vanessa didn't mention the blow. She didn't use charged words like assault, bias, or racism. Instead, she spoke just 3 words that stilled the crowd. We failed together. Then she explained, not just because an officer struck his superior without knowing who she was, but because too many people stood by and did nothing, because we've grown used to witnessing injustice in silence. And then came an announcement that shook the city. Any officer who verbally disrespects a citizen will face immediate suspension. All security cameras within the department would be upgraded and linked to a civilian oversight board. A new anonymous hotline would be established for officers to report misconduct within their own ranks. The air felt thick, but Vanessa wasn't done. Some will say I'm breaking tradition. Others will claim I'm pandering to the public. But I'm not here to comfort those who've grown too comfortable with privilege. Then came the shock. She read aloud the names of 12 officers suspended pending review of complaints filed over the last 5 years. Some of those names had once been untouchable in Arlington. I'm not targeting anyone. I'm doing what any real police department should do: hold a mirror to itself. That sentence became a viral quote within hours. After her speech, Vanessa didn't linger. She stepped off stage quietly. No interviews, no selfies. But a young local reporter chased after her asking, "Do you really think you can change this system? Can you do it alone?" Vanessa stopped, turned, looked her in the eye, and said, "I'm not doing it alone." She pointed toward the crowd, toward black mothers, high school students, white veterans, and public workers filming with their phones. We're doing it together. 3 months later. The New York Times ran a feature titled, The Arlington Effect: How a City Learned to Fix Itself. It detailed how Arlington's civilian oversight model was being adopted from Baltimore to St. Louis. One local high school renamed their annual forum, The Power of the Quiet. Lessons from Vanessa Thompson. And at Arlington Police HQ, once tainted by unchecked bias, a new bronze plaque now greets visitors at the entrance. We made mistakes, but from now on, justice is not a privilege. It's a promise. Vanessa Thompson never became a national icon. She didn't need to, because she never acted to be praised. She acted to change, hallway by hallway, face by face, choice by choice, and the way we treat each other when no one is watching. Vanessa Thompson's story didn't begin with a protest. There were no signs, no chants for justice echoing through the streets. Just one black woman walking into a police station as a nobody and walking out as a wake-up call. She didn't have to scream. She didn't need to get angry. She let the system speak for itself, through what it did to her. In a world where silence is often mistaken for weakness, Vanessa proved the opposite. That sometimes not reacting is the most powerful response. That real strength isn't in how we strike back, but in how we stay grounded when everything is meant to knock us down. She didn't ask for pity. She didn't claim justice on the grounds of race, gender, or title. She simply stood tall, amid mockery, contempt, and a fist thrown in hatred, and said, "Arrest the man who just hit me." That was it, and the room fell silent. Vanessa's story didn't end with a shock. It began there, with real change, with a system forced to recalibrate, with people brave enough to choose justice, and most importantly, she wasn't alone. If you've ever felt too small to make a difference, remember her, the woman who was hid in silence but made a nation speak. Because sometimes the strongest act of resistance is no resistance at all, just standing there, and letting the truth speak for itself. If this story made you stop and reflect, if it stirred something inside you, share it. Because maybe the next silence that needs to be broken is your own.